The docking bay of Outpost Theta buzzed with activity as the Threx diplomatic convoy arrived. Their sleek, mirror-polished shuttle hissed to a halt, vents releasing clouds of sterile vapor. Tall and draped in shimmering metallic fabrics, the Threx stepped onto the platform with the elegance of a species that had known only peace for generations. Awaiting them was a small group of human officers, their uniforms crisp but not flashy. Standing at the center was Captain Mara Vance, her hands folded neatly behind her back, a polite smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. The Threx had expected something more. Futuristic. They had heard of humanity's strange advances, their reckless bravery, their chaotic innovation, but they had not expected this. Strapped to the hips of several human guards were weapons that seemed anachronistic. Bulky rifles with metal barrels, ammunition belts with dull brass cartridges, and sidearms that looked more at home in a museum than at a diplomatic event. Beside them, of course, were the sleek energy pistols and streamlined plasma carbines typical of advanced species. But it was the old-world hardware that drew the Threx's golden eyes. Ambassador Velric, a towering figure with deep crimson markings across his brow, inclined his head curiously. "I see your people still carry projectiles," he asked, the translator implant smoothing his words into flawless English. Mara's smile widened just a fraction. "Yes, we do," she said, her voice calm and easy. The ambassador gave a soft hum, a sound the Threx used to convey polite confusion. "Fascinating. Surely with your advancements in laser technology, kinetic weapons are unnecessary. Quaint, perhaps." One of the human marines shifted slightly, the movement drawing attention to the old rifle slung across his back. The weapon was scared, lovingly maintained, its surface telling silent stories of battles long past. It contrasted sharply with the clean, almost clinical look of the energy weapons nearby. Mara didn't answer immediately. She simply gestured for the ambassador and his entourage to follow her. They moved through the corridors of Outpost Theta, a living blend of ancient ruggedness and cutting-edge design. Human engineers had built the station to last, not to impress. Here, form followed function, and durability mattered more than aesthetics. Along the way, the Threx noticed more curious artifacts. A wall-mounted plaque bore the image of an ancient human revolver, encased behind glass. Below it, a small inscription read, "When all else fails, trust in steel and lead." Ambassador Velric chuckled quietly. "Your species is sentimental," he observed. "We are," Mara agreed easily. "But we're also practical." As they entered the main reception hall, the ambassador leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Still, these bullets of yours, surely they are nothing more than tradition now. A symbol." Mara met his gaze, her eyes steady. "Bullets are a lot of things," she said. "Symbols, yes. Traditions, too. But mostly, they're a reminder." Velric tilted his head, intrigued. A reminder of what? She smiled, not the welcoming smile of earlier, but something deeper, older. A smile that hinted at history written in fire and blood. That sometimes simplicity wins when complexity fails. The ambassador said nothing, but a faint ripple of unease passed through his delegation. It was a small thing, barely noticeable, yet it lingered in the air like static, prickling against the polished poise of the Threx. They didn't know it yet, but soon they would understand, not through lectures or philosophy, but through cold, undeniable experience. And they would never forget it. The Threx delegation settled into their seats in the main hall, a sleek, metallic room that overlooked the vast expanse of space. Outside the reinforced windows, stars shimmered like diamonds scattered across velvet. It was a sight that never failed to impress. Yet for the Threx, it was simply a backdrop to the grand diplomatic meeting unfolding within. Captain Mara Vance stood at the head of the room, flanked by her officers. Her calm demeanor made it impossible to sense any underlying tension, but those who knew her could tell something was about to shift. "Thank you for making the journey," Mara began, her voice carrying effortlessly across the room. We appreciate the Threx's interest in our humble outpost." Ambassador Velric inclined his head, his golden eyes never leaving her. "It is an honor to be here, Captain Vance. We've been eager to learn about humanity's role in the galaxy. Your species, after all, has a fascinating reputation." Mara's smile tightened at the edges, her fingers tapping gently on the surface of the table. "Fascinating is one way to put it," she replied. "But we're not here to impress. We're here to survive, and that's a lesson we've learned the hard way." Velric tilted his head, the shimmer of curiosity brightening his features. "Survival? Surely your technological advancements have made survival a certainty." "Not a certainty," Mara answered with quiet assurance. "Not when the galaxy is full of dangers that you can't predict, or weapons that can fail when you need them most." There was a moment of silence in the room, the hum of distant machinery the only sound. The Threx diplomats exchanged glances, their confusion evident. It wasn't that they didn't understand the concept of risk, but to suggest that humanity's survival wasn't guaranteed. That was unusual. Mara shifted her weight, the posture of someone about to deliver a statement they knew would be met with skepticism. "We have weapons that are as advanced as anyone else's. Lasers, plasma, energy shields. They're all well and good until you encounter something that disables them. Shields can fail, targeting systems can glitch, and lasers can be jammed." Velric raised an eyebrow. "You speak as if these things are common." "Oh, they are," Mara said, her voice dropping a little. "You'll learn that. Everyone does, eventually. And when those systems fail, well, that's when humanity carries something most races have forgotten." She motioned to one of the Marines standing nearby. The soldier stepped forward, removing a weapon from his belt. It was a rifle, old by most standards, its wooden stock worn by years of use. The Threx diplomats leaned forward, eyes narrowing in confusion. "This is a bulldog," Mara continued. "Old, reliable. And when everything else fails, this is what we use. Because a bullet doesn't need a system to work. It doesn't need power, or a computer, or a perfect trajectory. It just needs a target." There was a brief pause. Then Velric chuckled. "You would trust something like that, when the rest of the galaxy relies on advanced weaponry." Mara's expression didn't change. "You'd be surprised what you can trust when your life depends on it." Ambassador Velric's smile faltered, the weight of her words sinking in. "Are you implying that humanity has encountered something that makes you distrust modern technology?" "Yes," Mara replied quietly. "And if you stick around long enough, you'll see why we carry these relics." The room grew still as the implications of her statement hung in the air. The Threx diplomats exchanged uneasy glances, but none spoke. Captain Vance didn't elaborate further. Her message had been clear, and now it was up to them to understand the truth. They didn't know it yet, but the lesson would come soon enough. And when it did, the Threx would remember this moment, the one where they first learned why humanity still carried bullets. The warning signs came suddenly, the kind of disturbance that never made it to the official alerts. At first, it was just a ripple in the communications feed, a flicker, an anomaly in the sensor data. Captain Mara Vance barely registered it. After all, Outpost Theta was a quiet place. Nothing unusual ever happened here, at least not on this scale. But then the lights in the command center dimmed. One by one, systems began to fail. First, the external sensors, then the main power grid. It wasn't long before the station's security grid went dark. Emergency lights flickered on, casting a grim glow across the faces of the crew. And that's when the alarm started. Incoming fleet. The Threx diplomats, still gathered in the briefing room, exchanged startled glances. Their translator implants crackled with static, trying to make sense of the sudden flood of data. Captain Vance's face hardened as she turned toward them. "This is no drill," she said, her voice low and urgent. "Everyone get to your posts. Now." The Threx had no idea what was happening, but the urgency in Mara's tone was unmistakable. They scrambled to follow as the human crew moved swiftly to their stations, communication lines opening, emergency protocols rolling into action. Outside, the stars began to blur as the attackers descended from the void. Ships sleek and black, their hulls designed to reflect the light of distant suns and blend seamlessly into the depths of space. They were fast, silent, and deadly. Their weapons unleashed a pulse of energy that swept across the station, cutting off all power. At first, the Threx believed it to be some kind of sophisticated laser weapon, but then they realized the truth. EMP bursts. The station's power systems, its shields and its weapons were nothing but dead weight now. The Threx diplomats turned to Captain Vance, but she was already moving, barking orders. "Get to the armory," she shouted, her eyes never leaving the main view screen. "Human Marines, get your weapons ready. We're not just going to stand here." For the first time, the Threx saw humanity's preparedness, not just in technology, but in spirit. The Marines were already moving, calmly, confidently, toward the armory. In the background, the emergency systems continued to sound off, warning of incoming breaches. "Captain, we're locked out of the primary controls," one of the officers reported. "Lock them out all you want," Mara muttered, her voice steady but sharp. "We'll fight back the old way." As she spoke, a human Marine appeared at her side, his face set with grim determination. He held a rifle, the same rifle that had caught the attention of the Threx earlier. It was an older model, its stock worn, its barrel scratched with years of use. Yet in his hands, it looked as formidable as anything the Threx had ever seen. "You'll need this," he said, offering the rifle to Captain Vance. She took it without hesitation, inspecting the weapon for a moment before giving a nod. "Let's remind them what humanity can do." The Threx watched in stunned silence as the humans geared up. Soldiers, engineers, officers, all ready to face an enemy they couldn't even see, with nothing more than cold steel and grit. The invasion had begun, and the Threx, for the first time, began to question their assumptions about humanity's role in the galaxy. They didn't yet understand how right Captain Vance had been. They didn't know why humanity still carried bullets, but they were about to find out. The first breach came without warning. A massive explosion shook the hallway outside the command center, throwing the Threx diplomats off their feet. The station's walls groaned under the pressure, but Captain Mara Vance barely flinched. Her mind was already racing, assessing the situation, calculating the next steps. She motioned for the Threx to follow her as she moved toward the emergency exit. "Stay close," she said curtly. "This is where it gets real." As they moved, the sound of gunfire echoed through the corridors, sharp, decisive shots that reverberated in the silence that followed. The humans were fighting back. The Threx, still disoriented by the sudden assault, struggled to keep up. They reached the armory, and the scene inside was a stark contrast to the chaos unfolding outside. The human Marines stood in tight formation, moving with a precision that only experience could breed. They checked their weapons, inspected their ammunition, and then moved out in perfect synchronization. Among them, there was no panic, no hesitation, just cold, hard readiness. "Are you armed?" Mara asked the Threx ambassador, turning to face him. Velric blinked in confusion. We have no weapons. We didn't prepare for an attack like this." "Then stay behind us," Mara said firmly, handing him a spare rifle. "Use it if you have to. We can't afford anyone standing around and waiting." The Threx took the weapon reluctantly, clearly uncomfortable with its weight, but Mara didn't have time to argue. She turned back to her soldiers. "Ready," one of them said. "Move out," Mara ordered. The Marines didn't need any further instructions. They filed out of the armory and into the main hall, the rhythmic sound of their boots echoing off the metal floors. Captain Vance led the way, her rifle at the ready, her eyes scanning every corner of the station. The Threx, despite their superior stature and technology, had to struggle to keep up with the humans' efficiency. Outside, the invaders had begun to breach the station's outer defenses, their silent, shadowy ships making their way deeper into the station. There was no time to lose. "Watch your corners," Mara muttered, her voice low. "These bastards are stealthy." The human Marines fanned out, using the walls and debris as cover, methodically clearing each room. The Threx, still clutching their unfamiliar weapons, followed closely, their unease growing by the minute. The contrast between the human soldiers' calm and the Threx diplomats' anxiety couldn't have been more striking. As they moved deeper into the station, the invaders began to make their presence known, a blur of black armor and silent movements. But it was too late. The humans had already anticipated this, and as the first invader rounded the corner, a Marine raised his rifle, taking the creature down with a single shot. The Threx watched in stunned silence, the simplicity of it almost impossible to comprehend. No plasma burst, no flashy energy fields, just a bullet, and a life ended in an instant. They saw it again and again. Human Marines, working as a single, unstoppable unit, cutting down the invaders with deadly accuracy. Every shot rang out with purpose, the rounds slamming into their targets with mechanical precision. The invaders had no time to react, no time to recover. Captain Mara Vance walked through the chaos like a force of nature, calm and unyielding. In her hands, the rifle was a tool, nothing more. And every shot fired was a message to the invaders. You are not ready for this. The Threx didn't understand it yet. They didn't know what made the humans so unshakable. But as they moved through the corridors, their hesitation began to fade. They were starting to see the power in humanity's simplicity. The invaders had underestimated humanity. That much became clear as the first wave fell before the humans' simple but brutal weaponry. Captain Mara Vance led her squad through the station's halls, each turn bringing them closer to the heart of the invaders' assault. The Threx diplomats trailed behind, their rifles awkward in their hands, but their eyes wide with realization. Humanity's strength wasn't in their advanced technologies. It was in their ability to adapt, to fight, to survive. The station's corridors were a maze of shadows and flickering emergency lights. The Threx tried to follow the Marines' lead, but their movements were too stiff, too uncertain. The human soldiers moved with fluid precision, each step taken in perfect synchrony, as if the chaos of battle didn't exist for them. They knew exactly where to look, where to listen, where to strike. Another round of gunfire rang out, the sound deafening in the narrow corridor. A Marine fired a burst from his rifle, his target dropping to the floor in a heap. The invaders, once so confident, were now scrambling to regroup. Their sleek black armor was no match for the sheer force of a well-placed bullet. They hadn't expected humanity to fight like this, raw, unrelenting, and merciless. The Threx ambassador, still clutching his rifle with shaky hands, stared at the scene unfolding before him. He couldn't quite process it. How was it possible that these primitive humans were holding their own against beings with far superior technology? "We fight with what we have," Mara had told him earlier. And now he understood the truth of it. As the Marines pushed forward, the invaders attempted to regroup in the station's central hub, but their retreat was short-lived. The humans had anticipated their movements. The sound of a grenade detonating echoed through the hallway as another invader was blown off their feet, their armor crumpling under the force of the blast. "Keep moving," Mara ordered, her voice calm despite the chaos. "They won't be able to hold out much longer." The Threx could only watch as the humans executed their plan with deadly efficiency. One by one, the invaders were pushed back, their numbers thinning with each passing moment. The Threx, despite their superior size and strength, found themselves overwhelmed by the raw effectiveness of the human soldiers. It wasn't just the weapons. It was the way the humans fought, the way they moved, the way they knew what to do in the face of danger. The invaders may have had superior technology, but they lacked the experience, the instinct that humanity had honed over centuries of struggle. The Threx could see it now, the truth that Mara had hinted at earlier. The bullets didn't need anything except the will to survive. The invaders were caught off guard by how relentless the humans could be, how unyielding they were when their backs were against the wall. A Marine tossed a flashbang into a room ahead, and the following blast sent a dozen invaders stumbling, temporarily blinded and disoriented. In that moment, the Marines closed in, each shot a testament to human resilience. As the last of the invaders fell, the station fell silent. The emergency lights flickered off, and for the first time in what felt like hours, there was a semblance of peace. The humans stood victorious, their uniforms singed and dirtied, but their weapons still in hand, ready for whatever came next. Captain Mara Vance looked at the Threx diplomats, her eyes hard but filled with quiet triumph. "Now you see," she said, her voice a steady reminder of humanity's greatest strength. "Bullets may be old, but they work when nothing else will." The Threx didn't speak. They didn't need to. They understood. The invaders had been repelled, but the cost was clear. The once pristine halls of Outpost Theta were now scared, with debris scattered across the floors and the faint smell of burning metal lingering in the air. Human soldiers, though victorious, wore the marks of battle: sweat-slicked faces, bruised bodies, and weapons that had seen too much. Captain Mara Vance stood in the central command room, her posture rigid as she watched the damage reports come in. The Threx diplomats, standing off to one side, had yet to fully grasp the magnitude of what had just happened. They still clutched their rifles awkwardly, their expressions unreadable as they processed the outcome of the battle. Mara turned to face them, her gaze steady. "This is what happens when you don't prepare. When you think you can rely on technology alone to solve your problems." Ambassador Gulric stepped forward, his deep red eyes searching her face. "We did not expect you to fight like this." "No one does," Mara replied, her voice low but firm. "But this is how humanity survives. We adapt, we improvise, and we never underestimate what we can do." The Threx glanced at each other, still grappling with the enormity of the situation. They had thought humanity was just another species among many, a species with advanced technology and weapons. They had no idea that the true strength of humanity lay not in its inventions, but in the unwavering resolve to never give up, no matter the odds. "We are not as you assumed," Mara continued, taking a step closer to the ambassador. "Humanity didn't rise to where it is by relying on shiny gadgets and complex systems. We fought wars with nothing but what we could carry, fought battles with the simplest tools. And when everything else fails, that's when we pull out what we've always known works." Velric's brow furrowed as he processed her words. "But your technology isn't invincible," Mara cut him off. "We've had our share of failures too. The invaders you saw today. We've had entire fleets destroyed because one ship's systems failed. One mistake, and everything falls apart. That's why we still carry bullets, because no matter how advanced you get, there are always risks you can't control." The Threx stood in silence, their faces slowly changing from confusion to understanding. They had seen it firsthand now, humanity's ability to stand firm when everything else crumbled. They had seen how bullets, simple as they were, could tip the balance in a way that lasers and plasma guns could not. Captain Vance walked over to a nearby table, where the battered rifle from earlier sat. She picked it up, running her fingers along its worn stock, her expression distant for a moment. Then she looked up at the Threx again. "This rifle has been through 100 battles," she said, her voice quiet. "And it's still standing. That's why we carry bullets, because they don't fail. They don't rely on anything but the will to fight." Velric's eyes softened, a rare vulnerability showing in his features. "I see now. It is not the bullets themselves, but the human behind them." Mara nodded slowly. "Exactly. Technology will never replace the human spirit, and no matter how far we go, we'll always carry that with us." The Threx stood in quiet reflection, no longer questioning the humans' reliance on their outdated weapons. Now they understood. They had seen the proof with their own eyes, and they would never forget it. The aftermath of the battle was a somber one. Outpost Theta, once a shining beacon of humanity's presence in deep space, now stood battered and scarred. The Threx diplomats had watched the humans fight with a mixture of awe and disbelief, their initial skepticism giving way to a reluctant respect. Yet, despite their admiration, there was a lingering question in the air. What now? The station had been badly damaged. The power grid was unstable, the outer hull was compromised, and several key systems were offline. Repairs would take weeks, even months. But none of that seemed to matter to the humans. They were already moving forward, assessing the damage and prioritizing what needed to be done first. Captain Mara Vance stood at the command center, her eyes scanning the damage reports that were coming in. Her face was unreadable, but those who knew her could see the weight of the situation pressing down on her shoulders. The battle had been won, but at what cost? The invaders had been repelled, but the station's infrastructure was in ruins. How long until the power grid is fully restored? She asked, her voice clipped. Estimated 2 weeks, Captain, one of her officers replied. We'll need to bypass some systems in the meantime, but we can get basic operations back online within a few days. Mara nodded, but her thoughts were elsewhere. She couldn't shake the feeling that the invasion was only the beginning. The Threx had seen humanity's resilience, but they had also seen the cracks in their defenses. The invaders had known exactly where to strike, and that couldn't be a coincidence. We need to be ready for more, Mara muttered under her breath. The Threx diplomats, still lingering at the back of the room, exchanged uneasy glances. They had spent the last few hours processing everything they had witnessed, trying to make sense of it all. They had never seen anything like this, a species so willing to fight, so willing to survive, no matter the odds. They had assumed that technology was the answer to everything, that a species could rely on advanced weaponry and defense systems to secure their survival. But the humans had shown them otherwise. Technology was important, yes, but it was nothing without the will to fight. The will to keep going when everything else failed. The will to carry on, even when the enemy was at the gates. Velric stepped forward, his voice measured. Captain Vance, we underestimated you. Mara turned to face him, her expression unreadable. You weren't the first. No, Velric continued, but you are different. We thought you were just another species in a galaxy full of them. We thought we knew what you were capable of. But now, we see the truth. Humanity's strength isn't in its weapons, it's in its people. The words hung in the air for a moment, heavy with the weight of realization. The Threx had come to the station with one view of humanity, and now they were leaving with an entirely different one. They had seen how the humans fought, how they used what they had to overcome the impossible. And in that moment, they understood. Survival wasn't about the most advanced weaponry or the most powerful technology. It was about the spirit that drove a species to never give up, no matter the cost. Captain Vance gave a curt nod, her gaze softening just slightly. We do what we must, and we'll keep doing it, no matter what comes next. The Threx didn't speak, but the respect was there, unspoken but undeniable. They had learned what they needed to, and as they left Outpost Theta, they knew they would never again underestimate humanity's place in the galaxy. Weeks had passed since the battle at Outpost Theta, and life was slowly returning to normal. The station was still in the process of being repaired, but the humans had proven once again that they were capable of overcoming even the greatest challenges. Their resolve had been tested, and they had emerged victorious. The Threx diplomats, who had stayed in the station long after the invaders had been driven away, were preparing to leave. They had spent the last several days observing the humans, learning from them in ways they hadn't expected. The experience had changed them, altered their perception of humanity forever. Captain Mara Vance stood at the station's observation deck, staring out into the vast expanse of space. The stars twinkled in the distance, a reminder of the endless possibilities that lay beyond. But for the first time, she was no longer focused on the unknown. Her thoughts were on the people she had just fought alongside. The soldiers, the engineers, the civilians who had all come together to defend their home. It had been their resilience, their unyielding determination, that had made all the difference. Not the fancy technology, not the powerful weapons, but the human spirit. It was something no enemy could ever defeat. The Threx ambassador, Velric, approached her, his steps quiet on the metal floor. There was a newfound respect in his eyes, something that hadn't been there before. "Captain Vance," he began, his voice softer than usual, "we are leaving now, but we wish to express our deepest gratitude. What we witnessed here, it is unlike anything we have ever seen. Your species, you are not like the others." Mara turned to face him, her expression calm but thoughtful. "I appreciate that, but don't thank me. Thank the people who fought and died here." Velric nodded, his gaze shifting to the station's corridors, where the human soldiers moved about, working tirelessly to rebuild. "It is clear now. Your people do not rely solely on technology. You rely on something greater, your will to survive, to protect, to fight for one another." "Exactly," Mara said. "And that's something no alien species can replicate. Technology is important, but it's only a tool. What matters most is the drive to keep going, no matter the odds." The Threx ambassador stood silently for a moment, reflecting on her words. It was clear now that humanity's true strength lay not in its technological advances, but in its unshakable spirit. They had fought with old rifles and outdated equipment, but what had made the difference was the heart behind every shot. "You've shown us something," Velric said finally, his voice resolute. "We underestimated you. We believed that survival was about superior technology, about power. But we were wrong. It is about the heart, the will to keep going, no matter the cost." Mara gave a small nod, her eyes scanning the stars once more. "And that's something you can't take from us." The Threx left Outpost Theta, their ships disappearing into the vastness of space, but they took with them something far more valuable than they had come with, a new understanding of humanity. Captain Vance watched them go, knowing that whatever the future held, humanity would face it as it always had, with bullets in their guns and fire in their hearts. And that, above all else, was why they would always survive.